Do you remember those forgotten 1940s dinners that vanished but still taste great? Back then, these dinners stretched rations into hearty plates that fed the whole family. If they were that good, why did we ever let them go? Oxtail ragout was one of those dinners that made something from nothing, which was exactly what families needed during the 1940s. Prime cuts of beef were rationed heavily, but oxtails were still available and often overlooked. Cooks knew how to turn that into an advantage, simmering the tails for hours until every bit of flavor seeped into the broth. The meat itself was tender and rich, but the real treasure was the gravy that came from the slow cooking process. Families would ladle it over rice, mashed potatoes, or even crusts of leftover bread. Nothing went to waste, and every spoonful felt like it was pulled from the hands of luxury, even though it came from scraps. The ragout became a true equalizer, showing that flavor was not tied to expensive ingredients, but to patience and creativity. Even today, the dish has an almost gourmet feel, though back then it was simply a way to stretch meat to feed everyone around the table. Parsnip patties may sound like an unusual dinner now, but in the 1940s they were a welcome solution to a pressing problem. Potatoes were in high demand, and sometimes impossible to find in the quantities families were used to. Parsnips, on the other hand, grew easily and had a sweet, earthy taste that could be turned into something filling. Housewives would boil them, mash them with a little flour, and fry the mixture into patties that looked like potato cakes. Children might not have noticed the difference right away, and that was part of the genius of the recipe. The patties were cheap, quick, and flexible enough to go with gravy or vegetables. They also made it possible to keep plates full when nothing else seemed to stretch far enough. What started as a substitute became a meal in its own right, proof that wartime kitchens always found ways to adjust. Forgotten now, they still taste surprisingly good. Rutabaga stew was another dish that shows just how much wartime families depended on root vegetables. Meat was often scarce or doled out in tiny rations, but rutabagas were hardy and easy to grow. They could be simmered with onions, carrots, and sometimes a small bit of pork fat or ham bone for flavor. The result was a simple but filling stew that could carry an entire dinner. Its sweetness balanced well with savory broth, and it became a common sight at rural tables. Many people who had never eaten rutabagas before the war found themselves relying on them week after week. They were cheap, nutritious, and available when little else was. The stew may not have felt like a feast, but it kept families warm and satisfied through long winters. Today, it has all but disappeared from kitchens, but in its day, it was a lifesaver, one of those humble meals that fed countless households. Kidney pie was one of the more divisive dinners of the 1940s, but it held an important place when cuts of beef were nearly impossible to come by. Organ meats were cheaper and more accessible because they were not as popular. Cooks learned to dice kidneys, stew them slowly with onions, and then tuck the mixture into a flaky crust. The pastry helped soften the intensity of the flavor, and gravy tied it all together. For working families, a kidney pie could provide multiple meals from a small amount of meat. Some people loved its richness, while others tolerated it because there were few alternatives. Either way, it filled stomachs at a time when hunger was a daily reality. Though it rarely appears on tables now, back then it symbolized resourcefulness and the willingness to embrace ingredients that were once dismissed. Forgotten today, it remains a piece of culinary history that kept families nourished. Boston brown bread with beans was an old New England tradition that resurfaced in force during the 1940s. Steamed bread made from rye, cornmeal, and molasses paired perfectly with baked beans, creating a full supper from cheap staples. It was hearty, sweet, and filling, exactly what families needed when meat was out of reach. Housewives could prepare both in one pot, letting the beans simmer while the bread steamed in coffee tins. The pairing offered protein, carbohydrates, and a touch of comfort all in one. It was also easy to scale for large families or community gatherings, making it a reliable choice for lean times. Brown bread and beans were not glamorous, but they were dependable, and that counted for more than appearance. As rationing pushed Americans to re-embrace older traditions, this dish gained a new reputation for thrift and taste. Today, it has faded into obscurity, but it was once a weekly staple. turnip casserole was one of those dishes that never seemed special until you remembered what else was missing. Meat was scarce, butter and cream were rationed, and vegetables like turnips had to step into the spotlight. Families layered slices of boiled turnip with breadcrumbs, drizzled with a little cream or margarine if they had it. Baked in the oven, it came out tender, flavorful, and filling. The turnip's earthy sweetness carried the dish, while the topping added crunch. It was inexpensive, easy, and familiar enough to satisfy even picky eaters. Many Depression-era families had relied on versions of it, so it felt like a return to something known rather than a brand new experiment. In wartime kitchens, that sense of continuity was comforting. The casserole could stretch to feed a crowd, especially when paired with bread or soup. Today, it is largely forgotten, but back then it was a reliable centerpiece. Veal loaf with tomato sauce was a budget-friendly cousin of meatloaf that became popular in the 1940s. Veal was often cheaper than beef, and grinding it made it possible to stretch the protein even further. Housewives mixed veal with breadcrumbs, onions, and spices, shaping it into loaves that baked evenly in the oven. To add flavor and moisture, a simple tomato sauce made from canned tomatoes was poured on top. The result was tender, savory, and filling, able to feed large families without straining the budget. It was also versatile, serving well hot at dinner or cold as sandwiches the next day. During years of rationing, that kind of efficiency mattered. Veal loaf was not the showpiece of any feast, but it did its job well, keeping families full on a small amount of meat. Today it has faded from memory, but for many, it was once a weekly dinner worth remembering. Mock turkey roast was a clever wartime invention meant to preserve the feeling of holiday meals when real turkey was nearly impossible to get. Ground pork or veal was seasoned and shaped into a roast that looked like the real thing. Stuffing made from bread, onions, and herbs was sometimes tucked inside to complete the illusion. It was then baked until golden and sliced at the table as though it were a genuine bird. Families appreciated the chance to keep traditions alive, even if the main course was not authentic. The dish brought laughter, resilience, and comfort during dark times. For children, the pretense often worked well enough, and it helped parents maintain a sense of normalcy. The roast may not have matched turkey in flavor, but it succeeded in spirit. Forgotten today, it shows how resourcefulness allowed households to hold on to tradition when circumstances made it nearly impossible. Stuffed eggplant became a practical way to make a hearty dinner with very little meat. Eggplants were inexpensive and easy to grow in gardens, which made them accessible during the shortages of the 1940s. The vegetable was halved, scooped out, and filled with mixtures of rice, breadcrumbs, cheese scraps, and small amounts of ground meat if available. The filling was then baked until golden, and the eggplant shells became edible bowls. Families appreciated the way this dish could feed many with very little. It was also adaptable, with endless variations based on whatever was in the pantry. Sometimes it was entirely meatless, other times it was enriched with leftover ham or sausage. Either way, it offered warmth, nutrition, and variety during years when dinners often felt repetitive. Today, stuffed eggplant is more associated with Mediterranean cuisines, but in the 1940s it was firmly planted on American tables as a clever way to stretch supplies. Rabbit pie was one of the most common meals in rural America during the 1940s. Domestic meat was rationed, but rabbits were still hunted or raised for household consumption. The meat was lean, affordable, and abundant in the countryside. Housewives would stew the rabbit pieces with vegetables and then bake them under a thick pastry crust. The result was a savory pie that stretched small amounts of meat across many servings. It became especially popular in farming communities where game was more available than store-bought cuts. Children grew up seeing rabbit pie as normal, even if city families found it unusual. The dish was deeply tied to survival, but it also carried tradition and familiarity. Many families passed recipes down through generations, though over time it disappeared from mainstream dining. Forgotten now, rabbit pie was once a symbol of resilience, a dinner that carried families through shortages while still tasting surprisingly delicious at the end of the day. Potato and peanut soup might sound unusual today, But in the 1940s, it was a clever way to combine two inexpensive ingredients into something nourishing. Potatoes were one of the most reliable crops during rationing, and peanuts offered protein when meat was scarce. Together, they made a hearty supper that was both filling and comforting. The soup was simmered slowly so that the peanuts would soften and release their flavor into the broth, thickening it into a rich base. Housewives often added onions, carrots, or celery if they had them, making it a meal that could feed an entire family from very little. The dish was not flashy, but it was dependable and thrifty, and that is what mattered most during hard times. For children who disliked the taste of organ meats or bitter greens, this soup offered a more familiar flavor while still delivering nutrition. Today, it has disappeared from most kitchens, but for families in the 1940s, potato and peanut soup was one of those life-saving recipes that kept everyone satisfied. Stewed dandelion greens with salt pork shows just how resourceful families became during the war years. Dandelions were not purchased in stores but foraged from fields, backyards, and even roadsides. When cooked down slowly with a bit of salt pork or bacon fat, their bitterness mellowed into something hearty and sustaining. People valued dishes like this because they provided vitamins at a time when fresh produce was often hard to come by. Victory gardens helped supplement family meals, but foraging meant free food that did not require ration coupons. Housewives became skilled at turning weeds into suppers, making sure nothing edible went ignored. Salt pork was added sparingly, mainly for flavor rather than substance, because every ounce of meat was precious. The combination produced a simple bowl of greens that filled stomachs and reminded people that survival depended on using whatever was available. Though modern tables rarely see it, stewed dandelion greens were once a dependable dinner that carried households through lean seasons. Cabbage and apple hot dish was a sweet and savory combination that became surprisingly popular during the 1940s. Cabbage was cheap, stored well, and grew in many home gardens, while apples added a tart sweetness that balanced the dish. Housewives would shred cabbage, slice apples thin, and layer them in a casserole dish with a splash of vinegar and sometimes breadcrumbs. Baked together, the result was fragrant, warm, and filling. For many families, this dish served as a main dinner when little else was on hand. It reflected the creativity of cooks who learned to make satisfying meals out of ordinary ingredients. Children liked it because the apples softened the sharpness of cabbage, and adults appreciated how inexpensive it was to prepare. It could be served with bread, potatoes, or even on its own, stretching to feed large families without much expense. Forgotten today, cabbage and apple hot dish shows how thrift and imagination shaped dinners in a time when every bite mattered. Sweet potato croquettes gave wartime dinners a touch of indulgence, even when luxuries were hard to come by. Sweet potatoes were widely available, inexpensive, and versatile, making them one of the staples of the 1940s diet. Mashed with a little butter or margarine, rolled into small cylinders, coated with breadcrumbs and fried, they became crisp on the outside and soft on the inside. Housewives loved them because they could be prepared in advance and reheated, making them practical for busy households. They also offered children a slightly sweet flavor that felt like a treat despite being affordable and filling. Croquettes could be served as a main dish with vegetables or as a side with whatever meat was available, though often they stood on their own. They were attractive, golden brown, and appealing at a time when presentation often took a back seat to practicality. Today, they are rarely seen outside of cookbooks, but in the 1940s, sweet potato croquettes were a comfort food that brightened the dinner table. Meatless spaghetti with breadcrumbs was another thrifty recipe that helped stretch scarce resources into a satisfying meal. Pasta itself was cheap and filling, making it an easy base for dinners when meat or cheese could not be spared. Instead of topping spaghetti with sauce or meatballs, housewives toasted breadcrumbs in a skillet with a little fat, garlic, or herbs if available. The crumbs were then tossed with the pasta to create a dish that was flavorful and filling even without expensive ingredients. Families quickly learned that breadcrumbs could mimic the crunch and richness of cheese at a fraction of the cost. This recipe became especially common in Italian-American communities, where traditional recipes were adapted to fit the realities of rationing. Children enjoyed it because it was simple and easy to eat, while adults valued its thriftiness. It disappeared as soon as meat and cheese became more affordable, but it still deserves recognition as a forgotten staple of wartime kitchens. Tripe stew was one of those dishes that few families looked forward to, but many depended on during the 1940s. Tripe, or cow stomach, was far less expensive than beef cuts and was often left untouched in butcher shops. Housewives who were determined not to waste anything would simmer it slowly with onions, potatoes, and carrots until the texture softened and the flavor deepened. The long cooking process made it tender, while herbs or vinegar helped disguise its strong taste. It was not glamorous, but it was filling, and that was the most important requirement of wartime cooking. Families who had never eaten organ meats before the war learned quickly that they offered both protein and affordability. Children often resisted the flavor, but hunger usually won out in the end. Today, tripe stew is rarely seen outside of specialty cuisines, but in the 1940s it was a staple that symbolized thrift, necessity, and a willingness to eat every part of the animal. Vegetable marrow casserole was a dish tied closely to victory gardens, which flourished during the war. Marrow, a squash-like vegetable, could grow large and plentiful with little effort, making it a favorite of home gardeners. Housewives would hollow out the marrow, stuff it with herbs, breadcrumbs, and occasionally a bit of meat, and bake it into a casserole that could serve the entire family. Drippings from roasts were often added for flavor, stretching even the smallest scraps to improve the dish. Its mild taste and soft texture made it suitable for children and adults alike. It could be served as the centerpiece of dinner, particularly when other vegetables were scarce. Families found that marrow was versatile, easy to prepare, and capable of filling hungry stomachs on limited rations. The casserole faded as soon as supermarkets offered more variety, but it remains a forgotten reminder of how victory gardens helped supplement household tables during some of the hardest years in memory. Bran loaf with raisins was one of the more unusual main dishes of the 1940s, combining thrift with nutrition. Fresh white flour was rationed, so bakers turned to alternatives like bran to keep loaves affordable. Mixed with sweet raisins, eggs, and milk if available, it baked into a dense but hearty loaf that could carry an entire dinner. Housewives would slice it thick and serve it with butter or margarine, sometimes even using it as the centerpiece of the evening meal. It offered fiber, energy, and sweetness in one simple recipe, making it especially appealing for children who were weary of soups and stews. The loaf kept well, could be eaten hot or cold, and provided leftovers that stretched into the next day. It was versatile enough to be served plain or paired with vegetables, soups, or even a bit of cheese if a household was fortunate. Bran loaf has disappeared from modern tables, but in the 1940s it filled an important gap. Boiled tongue with mustard sauce may not sound like something families would crave, but during the 1940s it was both practical and surprisingly popular. Tongue was a cheaper beef cut, one that butchers often sold when prime cuts were reserved for soldiers. Slow boiling softened the tough meat until it became tender enough to slice thin. It was then served with a sharp mustard sauce that gave it both flavor and bite, making the dish more appealing. For families with few alternatives, it felt like a way to enjoy beef without spending beyond their means. Tongue could be served hot at dinner or cold the next day in sandwiches, making it versatile as well as thrifty. Children might not have enjoyed the idea, but the flavor was hearty enough to win many households over. Forgotten today, boiled tongue was once a staple that allowed families to enjoy beef in a form they could actually afford. Peanut cutlets were a classic example of wartime creativity, showing how far cooks could stretch the idea of meat substitutes. Ground peanuts were mixed with breadcrumbs, onions, and herbs to form patties that resembled meat cutlets in both look and texture. They were then fried until golden brown, creating a crisp outside and a protein-rich interior. For families who could not afford or access meat, these cutlets were a lifesaver. They provided the satisfaction of a main dish without requiring ration coupons or expensive ingredients. Children often liked them because of their nutty flavor, and adults appreciated their affordability and ease of preparation. Peanut cutlets could be served with gravy, vegetables, or even tucked into bread for sandwiches. They disappeared once real meat returned to the table, but in the 1940s they represented ingenuity and resilience. Forgotten now, they still taste surprisingly good and remind us how resourceful families were when forced to reinvent their dinners. Beet greens with egg sauce were one of those thrifty meals that made use of parts of vegetables most people would normally throw away. In the 1940s, nothing went to waste, so the tops of beets were collected, boiled until tender, and served as a main dish. To make them more appealing, housewives would whip up a thin egg-based sauce, often using powdered eggs, which were more accessible than fresh ones. The sauce added richness and made the greens feel less like a side and more like the heart of the meal. It was not fancy, but it provided vitamins, protein, and comfort during a time when all three were needed. Families gathered around tables with plates of beet greens, grateful that something nutritious could be prepared without spending ration coupons. Many children may not have loved it, but they ate it because it was filling and familiar in a world that was changing fast. Beet greens with egg sauce was not glamorous, but it was dependable, and for that reason, it was a staple wartime dinner. Rice and prune hot dish was a sweet, savory casserole that gave families both calories and comfort during hard years. Rice was inexpensive, filling, and easy to prepare, while prunes offered natural sweetness, vitamins, and a touch of variety in diets that often felt monotonous. Housewives layered the rice and chopped prunes in casserole dishes, adding a splash of milk or even just water to keep it moist, and baked it until tender. The dish was versatile, served either as a main dinner or sometimes as a dessert when sugar was unavailable. It could be made entirely from pantry staples, which was important when fresh foods were scarce. Families appreciated how far it could stretch, turning a handful of prunes into a meal for everyone at the table. Its gentle sweetness made it popular with children, while adults valued its affordability. Though it has nearly vanished from cookbooks and memory, rice and prune hot dish was once a staple that carried many households through some of the leanest years of the 1940s. Mock oyster stew was proof of how creative wartime cooks became when seafood was too expensive or unavailable. Instead of oysters, housewives used mashed potatoes and onions, flavored with celery salt, milk, and butter if they had it. The texture and seasoning mimicked the briny richness of oyster stew closely enough to satisfy cravings while keeping meals affordable. For families living far from the coast, this dish brought the sense of having something special even if no oysters were involved. It was filling, warm, and familiar, which made it popular in colder months when people needed comfort most. The addition of celery salt gave just enough flavor to make it convincing, while potatoes ensured that no one left the table hungry. Children grew up knowing this version of oyster stew long before they ever tasted the real thing. Today, it is almost entirely forgotten, but during the 1940s, mock oyster stew was a clever way of turning simple staples into a dish that felt indulgent without draining the pantry. Squash fritters became a ration-friendly solution for families who wanted something crisp, savory, and filling at dinner time. Squash was plentiful in victory gardens, easy to grow, and cheap to buy at markets. Housewives grated it finely, mixed it with flour, eggs, and seasonings, and fried the patties in whatever fat they had saved. The result was a golden fritter that was crunchy on the outside and tender within. Families loved them because they could be eaten alone as the main dish or paired with soups and stews to round out the meal. Children especially enjoyed fritters, since their mild flavor was easier to accept than bitter greens or organ meats. They were also quick to prepare, which made them practical for busy households trying to keep up with endless chores. As soon as fresh vegetables became more widely available after the war, squash fritters faded from menus. Still, in the 1940s, they were a reliable dinner that proved even the simplest garden crop could be turned into something delicious. Wartime millet porridge was a dinner that reflected both necessity and resilience. Millet, once more common in animal feed, became a staple grain for families when wheat and corn were rationed. Boiled into a savory porridge, it was often served with a drizzle of gravy, meat drippings, or even just a bit of salt and pepper. It was inexpensive, filling, and capable of feeding a large family with little effort. Housewives appreciated how flexible it was, since it could be dressed up with vegetables or left plain when cupboards were nearly empty. Children did not always enjoy its coarse texture, but they learned to eat it because it was warm and sustaining. For many rural households, millet porridge was not just a meal but a symbol of survival when better grains were hard to find. It may seem like a forgotten dish now, but in the 1940s, millet porridge helped countless families stretch their resources and endure the long years of war with dignity and determination. Cold tongue salad was one of the more unusual dinners to come out of wartime kitchens, but it was practical and resourceful. Leftover beef tongue, boiled and sliced thin, was set into savory gelatin molds with onions, herbs, and sometimes pickles. Chilled overnight, it became a cold supper that could be sliced and served with bread or crackers. The gelatin preserved the meat longer, which was critical when refrigeration was limited and waste was not an option. Families often turned to this dish in the summer months when lighter meals were more appealing. Though many children balked at the unusual appearance and texture, adults valued how far it could stretch a small amount of meat. It may sound unappetizing today, but cold tongue salad represented a thrifty, clever way to keep protein on the table during rationing. Forgotten in most households now, it once held a regular place in community cookbooks and family kitchens as a reliable dinner that stretched resources while still tasting surprisingly good. Spinach and cheese loaf was a wartime invention that made use of both garden produce and ration-friendly staples. Spinach was grown in victory gardens across the country, and scraps of cheese, whether fresh or powdered, were mixed into loaves with breadcrumbs and powdered milk. The mixture was baked until firm, producing a savory, nourishing dish that could serve as the centerpiece of supper. Housewives liked it because it was easy to slice, could be served hot or cold, and provided both protein and vegetables in one recipe. Children often preferred it to soups and stews because of its milder taste and cheesier flavor. It was also practical since it kept well for leftovers the next day. Recipes like this showed how families adapted traditional loaf-style meals to stretch ingredients in creative ways. Today, spinach loaves are almost entirely forgotten, but during the 1940s, they offered households a way to eat well without spending ration coupons. For many families, spinach and cheese loaf was a thrifty dinner that still tasted hearty and comforting. Pickled tripe with onions was a dish common in working-class kitchens that has nearly disappeared today. Tripe or cow stomach was cheap and readily available, though not always well-loved. To make it more appealing, housewives simmered it until tender, then pickled it with vinegar, onions, and spices. Served cold or at room temperature, it was a protein-rich dinner that could last several days without spoiling. The vinegar tang helped cut the strong flavor of the tripe, while the onions added both crunch and sweetness. Though children often resisted it, adults learned to appreciate the dish because it was inexpensive and sustaining. Pickled tripe was often eaten with bread, stretching it further into a filling meal. It reflected the wartime mentality of wasting nothing and finding value in cuts of meat that would otherwise be discarded. While it has vanished from most tables now, in the 1940s, pickled tripe with onions was a familiar dinner for many families who needed to make every bite count. Turnip greens with cornmeal dumplings were a staple in many rural households during the 1940s. Turnip greens, which grew easily in gardens, were simmered slowly until tender, creating a rich, flavorful broth. Into that broth, housewives dropped cornmeal dumplings, which swelled as they cooked, making the dish both filling and satisfying. It was a dinner that stretched inexpensive ingredients into something that could feed a large family. Cornmeal was widely available and inexpensive, and dumplings required little more than water and salt to prepare. Together with the greens, the dish provided both nutrition and comfort, especially in colder months when gardens were bare. It became a meal tied closely to tradition, passed down through generations in southern and rural communities. Though it has largely faded from modern kitchens, turnip greens with cornmeal dumplings represent the heart of wartime resourcefulness. It was a dish that filled stomachs, kept families going, and reminded people of the value of simple homemade food made with care. Homey bake with bacon drippings was another creative way households turned pantry staples into hearty dinners. Homey, made from dried corn kernels, was cheap, filling, and widely available, especially in the South. Housewives baked it into casseroles, adding onions, milk, and most importantly, saved bacon drippings. The drippings gave the dish richness and flavor that hominy alone lacked, turning it into a dinner that felt indulgent despite its low cost. For many families, it became a centerpiece dish served with vegetables or bread. Children liked its creamy texture, and adults valued its thrift and simplicity. It was versatile enough to adapt depending on what was on hand, sometimes topped with crumbs, sometimes mixed with scraps of cheese if available. The dish reflected the wartime habit of saving every drop of fat and reusing it to make ordinary meals taste better. Forgotten now, hominy baked with bacon drippings was a dependable dinner that captured the ingenuity and determination of households living through the rationing years. Quick slaw with vinegar dressing was a tangy and no mayonnaise coleslaw variant that became popular for its simplicity and refreshing taste. This salad featured shredded cabbage and carrots tossed with a vinegar-based dressing made from vinegar, sugar, oil, and seasonings, offering a lighter alternative to traditional creamy slaws. Quick slaw with vinegar dressing was appreciated for how fast it could be prepared, requiring no lengthy chilling or mixing of heavy ingredients. Its crisp, tangy flavor made it a favorite side dish for barbecues, picnics, and casual meals during the mid-20th century. This version of slaw fit well within the era's culinary trends, favoring easy-to-make, health-conscious dishes that complemented grilled or fried main courses. The recipe's reliance on pantry staples and fresh produce made it accessible to home cooks seeking quick, flavorful accompaniments. Quick slaw with vinegar dressing remains a nostalgic favorite that highlights mid-century America's practical approach to salads. Grape and cheese salad was a sweet and savory cold dish that combined juicy, fresh grapes with cubes of sharp cheddar cheese and a touch of mayonnaise for added creaminess. This salad was a common favorite at family gatherings, potlucks, and holiday meals throughout the 1960s, appreciated for its unique blend of contrasting flavors and simple, quick assembly. The natural sweetness of the grapes perfectly balanced the tangy, robust flavor of the cheddar cheese, while the mayonnaise provided a smooth texture that brought all the elements together. Often served chilled on a bed of crisp lettuce or alongside other cold dishes, this recipe exemplified the era's fondness for pairing sweet fruits with savory ingredients in cold salads and appetizers. While it may seem unusual to modern tastes, grape and cheese salad remains a nostalgic symbol of inventive and approachable mid-century American cooking. It highlights the creativity and resourcefulness of home cooks who sought to create tasty dishes that were both convenient and visually appealing, capturing the comforting spirit of quick recipes from the 1960s. Cabbage roll casserole took all the flavors of traditional stuffed cabbage and turned them into an easy, budget-friendly bake. Instead of painstakingly rolling each cabbage leaf around the filling, chopped cabbage was layered with a seasoned mixture of rice, tomato sauce, and ground beef in a large casserole dish. This shortcut saved precious time, while still delivering the same comforting blend of sweet cabbage and tangy tomato that people loved. It was an affordable way to feed a family because the rice and cabbage made up most of the volume, allowing a small amount of meat to go a long way. As the casserole baked slowly, the flavors melded beautifully, and the cabbage softened until it was tender and sweet. Leftovers were just as good, sometimes even better the next day, making it a smart choice for tight weekly meal plans. Every family had its own spin, often seasoning with paprika, garlic, or fresh herbs from the garden. In many homes, this dish represented a perfect marriage of tradition and practicality, proving that with creativity, even the simplest pantry ingredients could deliver a meal that wrapped you in comfort after a long day. Spanish rice was one of those dishes that looked fancy without costing much, and it quickly became a household favorite in the 1950s. Families would stretch out a bag of rice by mixing it with canned tomatoes, chopped peppers, and onions, baking it into a casserole that filled the kitchen with a warm aroma. What made it special was how easily it could be adapted. If you had leftover meat or sausage scraps, you could toss them in, but even without them, the dish was still comforting and flavorful. Rice was cheap, vegetables were often grown in backyard gardens, and canned tomatoes were everywhere, making this an easy win for budget-conscious homes. Spanish rice became a side dish, a main course, or even a filler for tortillas when families experimented with new flavors. Its bright colors and bold taste stood out on dinner tables, and children often found it more exciting than plain rice or potatoes. For a generation making the most of post-war prosperity, this meal carried pride and practicality in every bite. Turkey and cranberry wraps were a clever and quick lunch idea that made excellent use of holiday leftovers in mid-century America. This recipe wrapped slices of leftover roasted turkey with a spread of sweet cranberry sauce inside soft tortillas or flatbreads. It offered a perfect balance between savory and sweet, combining the hearty flavors of turkey with the bright tartness of cranberries. Turkey and cranberry wraps were appreciated for their speed of assembly and portability, making them ideal for packed lunches or light dinners. The dish reflected the era's emphasis on practicality and frugality, encouraging cooks to creatively reuse festive ingredients. Its fresh, vibrant taste made it appealing beyond the holiday season, extending its presence in everyday meals. This recipe highlighted how simple ingredients could be transformed into satisfying, flavorful options that fit the busy pace of post-war life. Turkey and cranberry wraps continue to evoke the warmth and resourcefulness of classic American cooking traditions. Cucumber and radish salad with dill was a crisp, refreshing cold salad that became a favorite in the 1960s for its vibrant flavors and ease of preparation. Thinly sliced cucumbers and radishes were tossed with fresh dill and dressed lightly with vinegar, sugar, and sometimes a touch of sour cream or mayonnaise. This combination created a balance of cool, peppery, and herbal notes that complemented summer meals and barbecues beautifully. Served chilled, this salad was a quick 10-minute recipe that added brightness and texture to the dinner table, providing a healthy vegetable side with minimal fuss. Its simplicity and fresh ingredients reflected the era's growing appreciation for quick, garden-fresh dishes that could be prepared without lengthy cooking. Though less common today, cucumber and radish salad with dill remains a nostalgic and tasty example of mid-century cold vegetable salads designed to refresh and complement heartier foods. Baked bean and hot dog bake turned two of the cheapest grocery staples into something both kids and adults could not wait to eat. Large cans of baked beans were stirred together with sliced hot dogs and baked until the mixture was bubbling and thick, filling the kitchen with a sweet, smoky aroma. A topping of breadcrumbs or shredded cheese was sometimes added if the budget allowed, turning it into something even more special. The natural sweetness of the beans balanced perfectly with the salty smokiness of the hot dogs, making it taste indulgent even though it cost very little to prepare. This was the kind of dish you could bring to a school potluck, a church supper, or a casual weeknight dinner and know it would be gone in minutes. Some cooks tossed in chopped onions, peppers, or even a splash of mustard for extra tang, while others kept it simple for the pickiest eaters. Served alongside cornbread or a crisp green salad, it was a complete, satisfying meal that embodied the thrifty yet crowd-pleasing spirit of 1970s home cooking. Milk toast may sound too simple to be a dinner, but in the 1950s it was still a comforting staple, especially for children and the elderly. The dish was made by pouring warm milk over buttered toast and sprinkling it lightly with sugar or cinnamon. It was soft, mild, and easy to digest, which made it especially popular in homes where money was tight or illness-limited diets. Parents often made it as a quick supper when little else was available. Despite its plain appearance, milk toast carried an emotional weight because it was associated with care and comfort. Children saw it as a treat, while adults saw it as a reminder of leaner years when even simple foods mattered. The combination of warm milk and crisp toast provided both nourishment and reassurance. Though it has largely disappeared from modern kitchens, in the 1950s it was beloved as a gentle and familiar meal that everyone could afford. Crispy potato pancakes were a beloved pan-fried dish made from grated potatoes, cherished for their golden crunch and comforting flavor. Perfect for breakfast or dinner, these pancakes used simple ingredients like shredded potatoes, eggs, and flour to bind them before frying in oil or butter. The recipe's appeal lay in its quick preparation and the satisfying contrast of a crisp exterior with a tender interior. Mid-20th century families often turned to potato pancakes as an economical way to stretch ingredients while delivering hearty, flavorful meals. The dish was popular in both rural and urban kitchens, often served with sour cream, applesauce, or gravy. Crispy potato pancakes embodied the era's emphasis on practical, filling food that could be made easily with pantry staples. Their enduring popularity speaks to the timeless appeal of simple, well-executed comfort food that warms both body and soul. Sweet potato and raisin mash was a simple yet comforting side dish that brought together the natural sweetness of canned sweet potatoes with juicy raisins in an effortless mash. Popular during the 1960s, this recipe capitalized on pantry staples that required minimal prep but delivered satisfying flavor and texture. The sweet potatoes were mashed until smooth and mixed with plump raisins, creating a balance of creamy and chewy elements. Often served alongside main courses, this dish was prized for its sweetness and convenience, making it a common choice for busy weeknight dinners or holiday meals. Its quick preparation time fit well into the 10-minute recipe trend, offering families a way to add variety and warmth to the table without complex cooking techniques. While modern variations of sweet potato dishes tend to be more elaborate, the straightforward sweet potato and raisin mash stands as a nostalgic reminder of the resourceful, flavorful meals that defined 1960s American kitchens. Zucchini fritters with sour cream became a summertime favorite in the 1970s, especially when backyard gardens started producing more zucchini than families could possibly eat. Grated zucchini was mixed with a little flour, egg, and seasoning, then fried until golden and crisp on the outside while tender inside. They were inexpensive to make, and even kids who claimed not to like vegetables would eat them happily when served with a cool dollop of sour cream. The rise of home gardening during this time meant that zucchini was almost always on hand, and this recipe was a clever way to use up the surplus without wasting food. Fritters were light enough for a summer lunch but could also be served alongside meat or soup for a more filling dinner. The crispy edges and soft center gave them a texture that felt indulgent, even though they were made from humble ingredients. Sour cream added a tangy richness that balanced the mild zucchini flavor perfectly. Families loved them for their simplicity and versatility, often serving them hot from the skillet to the table. Cabbage and noodles was a meal that had already been a staple for Eastern European immigrants, but in the 1950s, it worked its way into the broader American kitchen as a cheap yet filling dinner. The ingredients were basic: boiled egg noodles tossed with sautéed cabbage, butter, and sometimes a sprinkling of breadcrumbs for crunch. Meat was not required, but families would occasionally add bacon drippings or ham scraps for extra flavor. It was one of those dinners where the aroma of frying cabbage was enough to remind people of their parents' or grandparents' kitchens. The dish was hearty but never heavy, and it could feed a family of 4 with little effort. Because both cabbage and noodles were inexpensive and available everywhere, it became a reliable fallback meal for households watching their budgets. Many children grew up eating this on cold nights when there was little else in the pantry. Though rarely served today, it carried the warmth of immigrant tradition and the ingenuity of families making every penny count. Eggplant Parmesan casserole brought a touch of Italian-inspired comfort to the frugal dinner table, making use of the abundant and inexpensive eggplant that was widely available in grocery stores and gardens. Slices of eggplant were dredged in breadcrumbs, sometimes homemade from stale bread, and baked or pan-fried until tender. These slices were layered in a casserole dish with marinara sauce and cheese, then baked until bubbly and golden on top. The eggplant's mild, creamy texture absorbed the flavors of the sauce, giving the dish richness without the need for costly meat. For those watching their spending, this casserole was a way to create a hearty, crowd-worthy meal that felt indulgent yet cost very little. Leftovers reheated beautifully, making it perfect for meal planning. Some home cooks added extra vegetables like spinach or zucchini between the layers, stretching the recipe even further. Paired with a side of pasta or crusty bread, eggplant Parmesan casserole was both filling and satisfying, offering all the comfort of a traditional Italian dinner at a fraction of the price. It stood as proof that vegetables could take center stage in a main dish without sacrificing flavor, heartiness, or the joy of gathering around the table. Cream cheese and pineapple spread was a sweet and tangy cold appetizer popular in the 1960s, combining smooth cream cheese with crushed canned pineapple for a luscious and easy-to-make spread. This recipe required no cooking and could be whipped up in minutes by folding pineapple into softened cream cheese, sometimes with a touch of sugar or coconut for extra flavor. Served chilled on crackers, celery sticks, or as a sandwich filling, the spread offered a perfect balance of creamy richness and fruity sweetness that delighted guests at parties and family gatherings. Its popularity reflected the era's love for combining convenience foods with bold, contrasting flavors that were both indulgent and approachable. Cream cheese and pineapple spread became a staple of mid-century entertaining due to its simplicity, taste, and visual appeal. While tastes have evolved, this spread remains a nostalgic favorite for those who appreciate quick, retro recipes that transform everyday ingredients into delicious treats. Green bean almondine was a speedy and flavorful side dish that perfectly captured mid-century America's love for simple, elegant vegetables. This recipe involved sautéing fresh green beans in butter and tossing them with toasted almonds for a satisfying crunch. The dish was favored for its minimal preparation time and ability to elevate humble green beans into a sophisticated accompaniment. Its buttery richness paired with the nuttiness of almonds complemented a wide range of main courses, from roasted meats to casual dinners. Popular at family gatherings and holiday meals, green bean almondine offered a fresh yet indulgent way to serve vegetables. The recipe's success lay in balancing texture and flavor, while requiring only a few ingredients readily found in most kitchens. This dish reflected the era's trend toward incorporating fresh produce into everyday meals with straightforward, quick-cooking methods. Its continued popularity attests to its timeless appeal and the nostalgic memories it evokes of classic American home cooking. Cheese and pineapple skewers were a cheerful, bite-sized appetizer that embodied the playful spirit of 1960s entertaining. Cubes of sharp cheddar cheese alternated with sweet pineapple chunks threaded onto toothpicks or cocktail sticks, creating an attractive and easy-to-eat party snack. The contrasting flavors of salty, savory cheese with juicy tropical pineapple made for a pleasing combination that delighted guests at cocktail parties, potlucks, and family gatherings. These skewers required no cooking and minimal preparation, allowing hosts to quickly assemble a tasty and visually appealing dish. This simple recipe reflected the era's fondness for finger foods that combined convenience with a touch of sophistication. Though the popularity of pineapple in savory dishes has waned, cheese and pineapple skewers remain a nostalgic symbol of mid-century Americana and its inventive yet accessible approach to casual entertaining. Ground beef and potato hash was a skillet meal that stretched a small amount of meat into something hearty enough to satisfy hungry stomachs after a long day. Diced potatoes were fried until golden and crisp, then combined with browned ground beef, onions, and simple seasonings. The result was a dish with plenty of texture, crispy edges on the potatoes, tender bits of beef, and the sweetness of caramelized onions tying it all together. This meal was endlessly adaptable, with some families adding vegetables like bell peppers or corn for extra flavor and bulk. It was a natural choice for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and it could be made in large batches without much extra effort. In frugal kitchens, hash was a way to make every ingredient count, turning basic staples into something satisfying and filling. It was also quick to prepare, making it a weeknight favorite. Served on its own or topped with a fried egg, ground beef and potato hash was the kind of no-frills comfort food that felt like a reward at the end of the day. It proved that even the simplest combinations could be deeply flavorful and endlessly comforting. Baked rice and raisins was one of those quiet comfort dishes that made the most of inexpensive pantry ingredients. Families in the 1950s would cook rice with milk, sugar, and a handful of raisins, then bake it until tender and slightly golden. The result was a sweet, custard-like dish that could serve as dessert or even as supper when money was tight. Its appeal lay in the way it used what people already had on hand without needing meat or costly extras. The raisins added bursts of sweetness, and the milk gave the dish a creamy texture that felt indulgent even though it was plain. Many children grew up eating baked rice and raisins after church or school, while parents valued its simplicity and affordability. It was also easily adaptable. Cinnamon, nutmeg, or even a bit of vanilla could transform it into something special. This dish carried both practicality and nostalgia, reminding families that a warm oven and basic staples could provide both comfort and satisfaction in hard times. The peanut butter and banana sandwich was a sweet and savory classic that found a special place in many mid-century American homes. This simple creation combined creamy or crunchy peanut butter with fresh banana slices layered between two pieces of soft bread, creating a quick, satisfying meal or snack. Its appeal rested on the harmonious blend of the nutty richness from the peanut butter and the natural sweetness and creaminess of the banana. The sandwich was easy to prepare, required no cooking, and could be made in minutes, which made it ideal for busy families or children's lunches. It also offered a nutritious boost, providing protein, healthy fats, and potassium. Over time, this sandwich became a nostalgic comfort food for many, evoking memories of childhood and family kitchens. Its simplicity did not diminish its popularity, as it balanced taste and health better than many other snacks of the era. The peanut butter and banana sandwich exemplifies how basic ingredients combined thoughtfully can produce a timeless favorite that crosses generations. Bacon and egg salad wraps were a savory and filling cold dish popular in mid-century America, combining chopped crispy bacon and hard-boiled eggs with creamy mayonnaise, then wrapped in fresh lettuce leaves. This recipe provided a tasty, portable meal or appetizer that fit perfectly into the 10-minute preparation window many home cooks sought. The smoky richness of the bacon blended harmoniously with the soft, protein-packed eggs, while the mayonnaise added moisture and a mild tang. Wrapping the mixture in cool, crisp lettuce offered a fresh, crunchy contrast to the creamy filling, making the dish both satisfying and light. Bacon and egg salad wraps were especially popular for casual lunches, picnics, and cocktail parties, offering an easy-to-eat finger food option that was visually appealing and flavorful. This dish reflected the 1960s focus on quick, convenient meals that still felt special and satisfying. Though modern wraps have diversified widely, these simple bacon and egg salad wraps remain a delicious reminder of the era's inventive yet straightforward approach to fast cooking and social dining. Mushroom barley soup was a perfect way to bring depth and richness to the table without expensive cuts of meat. The barley gave the soup a pleasantly chewy texture and added body, while the mushrooms provided a savory, almost meaty flavor that satisfied without animal protein. Onions, carrots, and celery were often included, creating a base that built flavor with every minute of simmering. A bit of broth, homemade when possible, brought everything together, allowing the grains and vegetables to soak up the seasoning. This soup was popular among those who appreciated hearty, rustic dishes that could be made in large pots and reheated for lunches or quick dinners. It was especially well-suited for colder months, filling the home with an earthy aroma as it cooked. Mushroom barley soup proved that thrift and flavor could go hand in hand, and it became a quiet favorite for many families who valued resourceful cooking. Scalloped onions might sound unusual now, but in the 1950s, they were considered an affordable delicacy. The recipe involved slicing onions thinly and baking them in a cream or milk sauce until tender. Topped with breadcrumbs, the dish developed a golden crust that contrasted with the sweet, mellow onions beneath. This was a way to elevate one of the cheapest vegetables into something rich and satisfying. Families often served scalloped onions as a side dish for Sunday dinners, where it added variety to otherwise plain meals. Onions were plentiful, inexpensive, and easy to store, making them a smart choice for budget-conscious households. Baked in cream, they transformed into a dish that felt far more indulgent than its cost suggested. While few people make scalloped onions today, at the time they were celebrated in church cookbooks and women's magazines as a thrifty yet elegant option. They stand as a reminder of how creative cooks turned basics into memorable dinners. Pimento cheese spread stood as a creamy, flavorful favorite that doubled as a dip or sandwich filling and became iconic in Southern kitchens. This spread combined sharp cheddar cheese with mayonnaise and diced pimentos, creating a smooth yet tangy mixture that brought vibrant color and taste to simple dishes. Pimento cheese's appeal was rooted in its versatility and ease of preparation, making it a go-to for quick snacks, party platters, and picnic fare. Families cherished this recipe for its comforting richness and ability to elevate basic ingredients. It was also budget-friendly, relying on readily available pantry staples to produce a satisfying result. The spread became a cultural staple, symbolizing Southern hospitality and home cooking traditions. Its creamy texture and bright flavor offered a delicious contrast to crackers, bread, or raw vegetables. Pimento cheese spread remains a beloved classic that reflects the warmth and resourcefulness of mid-20th century American kitchens. Quick cranberry and orange relish was a vibrant and tangy cold-side dish that gained popularity in the 1960s for holiday meals and casual dinners alike. This recipe mixed fresh or canned cranberries with grated orange zest and sugar, sometimes adding chopped nuts for crunch, all combined into a zesty relish served chilled. Its bright colors and lively flavors offered a refreshing contrast to rich main dishes such as roasted turkey or ham. The relish was easy to prepare, requiring little more than mixing and chilling, making it an ideal 10-minute recipe for busy cooks. It captured the decade's preference for quick, flavorful condiments that added zest and variety to traditional meals. Though cranberry sauce remains popular, this quick cranberry and orange relish stands out as a nostalgic alternative that embodies mid-century America's inventive take on holiday sides and fresh fruit dishes. Vegetarian lentil stew with carrots and celery proved that a meatless dish could still be deeply satisfying. Lentils, one of the cheapest sources of protein, formed a rich and hearty base that absorbed the flavors of sautéed onions, earthy carrots, and crisp celery. Simmered with simple seasonings like bay leaves, thyme, and a hint of tomato paste, the stew developed a slow-cooked depth that belied its low cost. In an era when both budget-conscious and health-focused cooking were gaining ground, lentil stew became a practical staple for many households. It was the kind of dish that could be made in large batches, reheated well, and even frozen for future meals. Served with a crust of bread or over a bed of rice, it became a meal that filled the stomach and warmed the body. The affordability, nutrition, and adaptability of this stew made it a quiet but dependable hero of 1970s home cooking. Mock turkey loaf was one of the cleverest illusions to come out of 1950s kitchens. Real turkey was expensive and reserved for holidays, but ground pork or veal could be seasoned and shaped to resemble a miniature roast bird. Families would mix breadcrumbs, onions, herbs, and eggs into the meat before baking it in a loaf pan. Sometimes it was brushed with a glaze to give it a shiny, festive look. On the table, it was sliced like roast turkey, letting families enjoy the ritual of carving even if they could not afford the real thing. Children rarely knew the difference, and parents took pride in pulling off the illusion. This dish represented more than thrift. It was about creating dignity at the dinner table. Even in lean years, families could enjoy a holiday-style meal in the middle of the week. It was practical, flavorful, and gave everyone a sense of celebration without the expense. Bacon-wrapped dates were a quick and flavorful appetizer combining smoky, salty bacon with sweet, chewy dates. This simple yet indulgent dish provided a delightful contrast in taste and texture that made it a popular choice for parties and casual gatherings during the mid-century era. The recipe required minimal ingredients and little time, making it accessible to home cooks looking to impress guests without elaborate preparations. Bacon-wrapped dates reflected a trend toward finger foods that offered both richness and a hint of exotic sweetness, appealing to evolving palates. The dish also showcased the inventive use of contrasting flavors typical of the period's culinary experimentation. Its ease of preparation and crowd-pleasing nature helped cement its place on appetizer menus and family celebrations alike. Bacon-wrapped dates remain a beloved classic that represents mid-20th century America's knack for combining simple ingredients into memorable bites. Sloppy joes on homemade buns were one of the easiest and cheapest ways to stretch a pound of ground beef in the 1970s, and they brought a sweet, savory aroma that could fill the whole house. The meat was browned with onions, then simmered with ketchup, mustard, and a touch of brown sugar until it became a thick, flavorful filling. Serving it on homemade buns made it even more frugal, since flour, yeast, and water cost much less than store-bought bread. These sandwiches were messy, hearty, and perfect for feeding a table of hungry kids after school or a weekend afternoon outdoors. They were the kind of meal that could be doubled without much extra cost, making them popular for church picnics or potlucks. The sauce soaked into the bread just enough to make each bite juicy, but not so much that it fell apart before you finished eating. Many families added whatever vegetables they had, like diced peppers or carrots, to stretch the filling even further. Sloppy Joes were the perfect mix of comfort and thrift, the kind of food that stuck with you long after the plate was cleared. Which vanished 1940s dinner would you try? Comment below, like the video, and subscribe for more forgotten flavors.